Hey there, fellow vegetable nerds. Thank you so much for hanging out with me once again in my kitchen. We're gonna do something a little different today. We're gonna make something a little unusual. We're gonna get weird with a whole bunch of cucumbers. So let's start meat and veg.
Hey, turn up the caramello and shizzle on the shizney. It's time for me to what? Let me introduce myself. I'm Gina Burrito. My pants are made of leather. I find it hard to concentrate.
So Kelly, I hear you say, what gives with all the cucumbers? What are we gonna do with this quantity of cucumbers? And I notice quite the quantity of onions also set up. Well, today we're going to be making a recipe from this book right here. It's Regency Christmas Traditions, a Jane Austen Christmas by Maria Grace. This was the first book sent to me from my Amazon wish list, and this was sent to me by Ashley. And you may remember Ashley as the person who sent me these. Remember that? Like the coolest oven mitts on the planet. So as promised, you send me a cookbook, I'm gonna make something from the cookbook. This is not by any means like a scholarly tome. There's not really a narrative to it. It's just little snippets of information about ways that you would have celebrated Christmas during Jane Austen's time. And then towards the back, you've got some recipes. Now these recipes are just straight up lifted from contemporary cookbooks. You may remember, if you watched any of the medieval cooking videos that I made, that I talked about how a lot of times these recipes are extremely simple and not very intuitive. They're just sort of making a lot of assumptions that you understand what they mean. And so a lot goes into sort of modernizing them. They didn't do any of that, which is fine, because you get the joy of reading them as they were written. But that does mean that following them is gonna take a little, you know, a little finger crossing. I did look through here, and now, as you might imagine, a Christmas book is gonna be full of dessert recipes, and it was. And so you've got loads and loads of plum puddings and Christmas puddings and all kinds of things like that. And then you've got a whole bunch of meat things and a bunch of breads and sweet breads and things. This is a vegetable show. So I went looking for vegetables, and I found them, and they were all weird. So people in the past were weird. And I can say that as a person with a degree in history. I spent $30,000 to be able to tell you with authority, people in the past were weird. Here are our options. There's boiled cauliflower. There's boiled broccoli in imitation of asparagus. No ma'am. Fried celery, which I have to say, I have seen a lot of things about cooked celery, and I'm gonna have an episode coming up where we just talk about celery, because I tell you what, celery is gonna blow your mind. I have learned some things about celery. It gets real fascinating, and I'm not gonna go into it now because I'm gonna go into it then, and I'm gonna go into it in just stunning detail that will bore the shit out of you. So prepare yourself for that. So what I was left with, oh, and then there's Bubble and Squeak and Coal Cannon, so lots of, you know, potato-y, cabbagey kind of things. And I was like, you know, that's kind of been done. And then I saw our winner, the guy we're going with, stewed cucumbers. Does that sound delicious to you? No, it doesn't sound delicious to me either. But, you know, you gotta try things. You gotta keep an open mind. I have come to be fascinated with the idea of vegetables being prepared in ways that we don't think of them being prepared. I have seen a lot of vegetables in places I didn't expect them to be, and you can be really surprised by the versatility that you didn't know vegetables had, because we get stuck into this idea that there's one way to make them. So when there's an opportunity to make them in a different way, I want to try that out. Will this be gross? Maybe. Will this be my new favorite thing? Also maybe. You know, how do you know if you don't try things out? Years ago, I went to a Thai restaurant with my husband Brian, and he got these noodles, and one of the ingredients is like stir-fried lettuce. And that blew my mind. The idea that you could cook lettuce, but then it blew my mind further, just the idea that it never occurred to me that you could cook lettuce. We cook spinach, we cook all kinds of other greens. Why would we cook every green except for lettuce? Only because that's just not something that we do. And then it made me think, like, what else are we not doing? And then one day I saw a salad that had raw Brussels sprouts in it. And I was like, yeah, I'll bet you can eat Brussels sprouts raw. And guess what? You can, and they're delicious. Sometimes you got to keep an open mind and try stuff out. Now this recipe here, not that big, it's real small. The recipes were just straight up cribbed, okay? They did not modernize these recipes. They didn't do anything to make them a little bit easier for a modern person to make them. So we're just gonna wing it. It is nice that they tell you the sources. So these are taken from contemporary sources. These are books that would have been available in Jane Austen's time. So Jane Austen was born in 1775, died in 1817, and this recipe actually comes from a writer named Hannah Glass. She is one of the most famous cookbook writers of all time, you know, at least in the English-speaking world. Let me be careful there. Now, she actually died 5 years before Jane Austen was born, but her cookbook, her first cookbook, I should say, the first cookbook she ever wrote ended up being the #1 cookbook for the entire century. So it definitely would have been around and still used in Jane Austen's time. It was extremely influential. Now, speaking of straight up lifting things, about a third of it was just straight up lifted from other writers. So she got a little creative with her sourcing of information, but that's not to say that there was nothing original in there. You know, there are so many things that can be traced back to Hannah Glass as the original source of them. There are things that didn't appear in modern cookbooks until she put them in hers, including the Yorkshire pudding. The very first record that we have of a recipe for Yorkshire pudding came from her. So, you know, a little something familiar, a little something unfamiliar. Something old, something new, something borrowed, maybe something even blue, I don't know. Our stewed cucumber recipe. They didn't even change the weird, you know how in older versions of English you've got the S that looks like an F? So you have to take 6 large cucumbers and slice them, and 6 large onions. I don't know why sometimes the F is like an S is an F and sometimes the S is just an S. Sometimes a cigar is just a cigar, yada da da da. I don't know, man. So 6 cucumbers. This is, of all the things, the scariest part to me. The fact that it takes 6 cucumbers and 6 onions. Because if I don't like it, I just... the idea of wasting 6 cucumbers and 6 onions makes me sad in my heart. So no matter how this turns out, I'm gonna have to eat it. I'm gonna have to eat it all. Either that or I'm gonna have to come up with some sort of plausible reason to rationalize the not eating of it. But you know what? Let's go into this with an open mind. The whole point of this channel is I'm trying to encourage other people to try things that maybe they haven't tried before. I am a total hypocrite if I don't also try things that I've never tried before. So let's try new things together. First things first, we're gonna take our 6 large cucumbers and we are going to slice them. It doesn't say anything more than that. And then take our 6 large onions, peel and cut them in thin slices, and then we're gonna fry them both brown. Now here's my first point of contention with this recipe. It does not say that you should peel the cucumbers, but I feel like you should, because we're stewing them, we're cooking them down. I feel like you're just gonna end up with some mush and then some like weird ribbony bits of peel. And that sounds bad. And so I went and I looked up other versions of this dish, and including, you know, modernized versions of this exact dish from this cookbook. And the consensus from what I read, and in fairness, I haven't read every single version of this ever made, I just went looking at a few, seemed to be to peel it. So executive decision time. I'm gonna peel the cucumbers. So in case you were wondering, that's what 6 cucumbers look like when they're peeled and sliced. Now, she doesn't say how thick to slice them, which is not surprising because these old recipes are often not very informative. So I did them Not that thin. I mean, probably maybe she meant them to be thinner, but honestly, it's like 2:30 in the morning. You're gonna get what you're gonna get. Yes, that's right. I stew cucumbers at 2:30 in the morning. What do you do with your time at 2:30 in the morning? This is my life. All right, this is a lot of cucumbers. And I'm thinking now, I actually thought for some reason that I was gonna fit all 6 cucumbers and all 6 onions in this bowl. I'm starting to think that spatial calculations not really my forte. I'm also starting to rethink the size of this pan. Might have to we're gonna need a bigger boat, is what I'm saying. Now to peel and chop 6 onions. Hey, guess what I learned? I learned that 6 is kind of an unreasonable quantity of onions. I got this bowl thinking that'll fit 6 onions. It did not. That's a lot of onion. Not to brag or anything. I made it to onion 4 before I even started to feel anything, so speaking of larger quantities than I expected, I did switch out my pan. I got a much larger one. This one is a chicken fryer. Hopefully it's big enough. This is quite the quantity. Now I double checked and I wanted to make sure that we're browning all of it and not just the onions, because I can't imagine browning cucumbers. But, you know, I couldn't imagine stewing them until tonight, so, you know, but it very definitely says fry them both brown. On the one occasion that she's gonna be specific, we gotta take her at her word. It doesn't say what kind of fat to use. Later it says to use butter. So right now it just says we're gonna be browning them in some kind of fat, which we will then be draining off and discarding. So I'm gonna use a little bit of olive oil. I might have to do this in batches. Like, I didn't want to have to do that, but I might have to. Problem is, the more you put in your pan, the more you're going to overcrowd it, and then you're not going to have as much heat, and you're not going to get that browning. So we're not going for cooking, we're going specifically for that browning. And that means that they all need to have an equal opportunity to hit the bottom of that pan. So if I overcrowd it, it's gonna end up piling on top of itself and sort of steaming from the underside up, and we don't want that. So we're gonna be stewing it. So this is all about the Maillard reaction. Oh yeah, look at me with the fancy words, whipping them out. That's just browning. This is a fancy way. The guy who discovered it was like, I'm gonna get my name on that. So yeah, give him his due. I don't know if this is gonna be good or not, but I tell you what, I love cucumbers. And I love onions, and we're gonna be cooking them in butter. I love butter. It's practically my blood type, you know? So maybe this is gonna be wonderful. I'm not thrilled about the fact that it doesn't have a whole lot of spice to it. It's pretty much just salt and pepper. I did find, now here's something interesting, there's other versions of this recipe by Hannah Glass herself that have spices in them. And mace was a big one. It was mace and a couple of other interesting spices in there, and I was so tempted to try that version, but this is the version in the book that I was sent, and I promised if you send me a book, I will make something from that book. These smell amazing. The smell of onions cooking. I tell you what, I used to work in a place that was right next door to Five Guys Burgers and Fries, and we shared a ventilation system. Oh my God, the smell of onions cooking was so delicious, but maddening, because, you know, we're all trying to eat healthy, we're all trying to be good, and then just, oh, it would just waft in, and it smelled so good all the time. I want to put the cucumbers in next just because I want to see what they do. I've never fried cucumbers before. They're browning real fast. Okay. subject of precedent for cooked cucumbers, while I was looking this up, I wanted to get some information on just the very concept of eating hot cucumbers because it was triggering something in my memory when I first looked at this recipe, and I remembered I had seen this once before. And I have this book here from the Old Farmer's Almanac. This is the Old Farmer's Garden Fresh Cookbook. And this has a recipe in here for hot cucumbers. This one here is a cucumber and chervil soup. So I was like, okay, and I'm looking at the ingredients in it. So you've got butter, scallions, cucumbers, salt and pepper, flour, chicken broth, minced chervil, and heavy cream, and they're not that different from what I'm making. And then I started thinking about it, and I was like, I'll bet this is one of those weird old recipes that you don't see much anymore. And so I started looking through some of my older cookbooks. Now, fun fact, I have a lot of cookbooks. I have a lot of cookbooks. Now you might be wondering, Kelly, if you have so many cookbooks, how come your Amazon wishlist is full of cookbooks? Because I like cookbooks. It's like being like, hey, I noticed you have a lot of baseball cards. How come you are looking for more baseball cards? Because I want to have a lot of baseball cards. I checked out this one, which is the Gold Cookbook by Louis P. de Goy? I don't speak French. And this is from, I want to say 1949. Okay, first edition was 1947. This appears to be the 13th printing in August of 1960. But I went looking into this older book, and when you look up cucumbers in the back, we get so many options. There's cucumbers au gratin, there's baked stuffed, and I'll tell you what, I went looking through a bunch of older cookbooks. I didn't like bring them all out, because this one here just seemed to have it all in there. Baked stuffed cucumbers comes up a lot. Not just baked, not just stuffed, but baked and stuffed. So I have a feeling I might be making a video at some point, because I kind of want to see what that's all about. But there's also boiled, broiled, cooking of cucumbers, cream slices. I have had cream slices of cucumber, and oh, delicious. You just slice it real thin with some thin sliced onion, and you put it in some sour cream with a little bit of dill or whatever other kind of herb you have, and like, oh, so nice. Fritters, cucumber fritters. Huh. Let's see, pressure cooked. Ew, but you know, maybe not ew. We got sauteed, scalloped, cream of, and wilted. So there's apparently a million different ways to make cooked cucumber. We just don't do it anymore. And that leads me to my next fun bit of information, which is the fact that people have been eating hot cucumbers since like the dawn of time. Not the dawn of time, I'm exaggerating. But Pliny the Elder wrote about them in his book, the Naturalis Historia, which is basically Pliny the Elder. He lived from 23 to 79 AD, and he was something of a naturalist, and he tried to write this, well, he succeeded, he did write this huge encyclopedia, and we don't have all of it, but in one of the books that survived, there is a recipe, and when I say recipe, it's practically a couplet. Apparently, the farther back in history you go, the shorter and less informative the recipes get, but it's a recipe for stewed cucumbers. So, according to him, in Latin, coctos duraso corticae ex oleo et aceto ac mele iucundiores esse certum est. That means truly, cucumber peeled and cooked with oil, vinegar, and honey is most enjoyable. I gotta be honest, that sounds nice. So, I did get some information about this from a website. I'm not trying to be a plagiarist here, so I will link to that website in the description, and they also have an updated version of that recipe if you would like to try making Pliny the Elder's recipe, which maybe I will. Who knows? You know, cooking is a lot like science. There's a lot of measuring and stuff, but really at the end of the day it comes down to two things. Fuck around and find out. So we're gonna find out. And the only way to find out is to fuck around, so let's do it. If it turns out I did this wrong, I'll probably know. In the final, in the final product, generally, if you don't like it, you can kind of ask yourself, well, what don't I like about this? What could have been done differently or better in the future? So maybe I won't get it right the first time. Maybe I'll think to myself, you know, I could have done smaller batches. I should have taken the time to do more smaller batches, or maybe I should have done this, or maybe I should have done that, made this change, but how else am I gonna find out? We're gonna need a 1/4 pound of butter rolled in flour. Here is some flour. Here is our 1/4 pound of butter. And you just kind of roll it and let it pick up what it's gonna pick up. Now I could have done this before filming, and that probably would have been smart, but I had a feeling I was probably going to end up covered in flour, and I thought maybe that would be jarring to the viewer to suddenly see me covered in flour for some reason, or to see me start the video covered in flour. The option of doing this without getting myself covered in flour didn't really feel like a real option. In other news, butter does not seem to want to stick to flour and vice versa as much as I thought it would, but we are kind of getting there. Patting the flour into the butter. Okay, so I guess it's about as brown as it's gonna get, unless I want to be here all night, all morning, you know. It's brownish. I mean, I don't feel like I got a whole lot of that, you know, Maillard kind of reaction. I don't know that it's as brown as it's supposed to be, but I mean, it's as brown as it got. Pour them into the pan again with 3 spoonfuls of hot water, 1/4 pound of butter rolled in flour, and a teaspoonful of mustard. So it does not say how big our spoonfuls of water are supposed to be. However, it specified that we wanted a teaspoon of mustard. So I'm guessing maybe tablespoons of water. I have the water heating in the microwave at the moment. So here's all our loveliness. I'm just gonna go with tablespoons. So, 1, 2, 3 tablespoons of water, stick of butter, rolled in flour, and then a teaspoon of mustard. Now, I was not certain whether this was going to be prepared mustard, Dijon mustard, you know, whatever kind, or whether it was going to be mustard powder. It was not clear. So I went and I looked at these other recipes, and it all seems to suggest that probably we want just like some Dijon mustard. If that turns out to be wrong, now we're going to incorporate all of that. I gotta be honest with you, I'm starting to suspect this is going to be yummy. Season with pepper and salt, and let them stew a 1/4 hour softly, shaking the pan often. When they are enough, dish them up. That is such a fun and classic old recipe line. When they are enough. When you're pretty sure they're done, they're done. Okay, thanks, but that's okay. Cooking is about following your heart anyway. So, get some pepper on there. Grab our little salt pig. I got this from my local Buy Nothing group. Somebody was giving it away and I was like, yes, I would like a salt pig, thank you very much. So since it said to stew it softly, I'm going to turn this heat down to low. It smells very savory, you know, and I think that the flavor of the cucumber is going to be very different from what I'm used to from cucumbers. A lot of vegetables end up tasting completely different once you cook them, and especially in different ways. The different ways that you cook them will change the flavor a lot. Like a Brussels sprout that has been boiled and a Brussels sprout that has been, sort of charred crispy, where you, again, that Maillard reaction where you get, some sugars forming and caramelizing, 2 different flavors. A boiled Brussels sprout is like a little fart ball, and just all you taste is that sulfur. But when you kind of char it a little bit, oh, it's a whole different thing, and it's beautiful and lovely. Well, certain other things like radishes are nice and sharp and bitey. There's a little kick to a radish when you have it raw. But when you roast it, it becomes sweet and lovely and delicious and a whole different thing. So I'm interested to see how the character of cucumber is going to change as it cooks. I do kind of think this is going to end up being what I would consider almost like a relish, or, you know, like a topping for something. Like, I feel like this is going to end up being the sort of thing that maybe I would put on a hot dog, or like, oh, I bet this would go really well with like sausages. I have some sausages in the fridge. I think this would be a good pairing. There's a part of me that wants to wait until it's done to taste it so that I can be surprised, but that's not how cooking works. You gotta taste things as you go, because then you could adjust your seasonings and stuff. Also, I'm very curious. I got a little bit of cucumber, got a little bit of onion in here. I was fully prepared to hate this. But like I said, I went into it with an open mind, an open heart, hoping to be pleasantly surprised. And I have been. A little bit more of this on there. Oh yeah, it's so good. It's really good. Now, if you did a thing where you blindfolded me and you were like, hey, take a taste of something and you gotta tell me what it is, would I ever in 100,000 years say that that was cucumber? No, I would not. So any of that slight bitterness that you get from cucumber, which comes from a chemical compound, I believe it's cucurbitacin C. I will have to double check on that, but it gives it a little bit of that cucumber bitterness, which I really enjoy. But that's gone. I guess, I don't know, maybe that's heat sensitive or something and it cooked off, but all of that is gone and it's just sweet. And you get the sweetness of the onions, and it's buttery from, you know, butter. I don't taste the mustard very much, but I think that was probably the point. It was just supposed to blend in with the flavors and heighten them a little bit without being too much of an assertive flavor on its own. I almost want to add more, but I think I won't. I think I'm just gonna let it be what it is. We've still got about 8 more minutes to let this cook down. This is maybe more than I need to make for me. I do a little bit wish that I had made a half batch, but I just wanted to make it as is and see what happened. And I did it. And I'm happy that I did that. What am I gonna do with all of this? I don't know. Will it freeze well? I don't know. So we got about another minute and a half on this. I'm actually reading through the book a little bit while I'm waiting for this to stew. It's actually really interesting. It's actually a very fun book. I wasn't thinking about it at first. I was like, oh yeah, you know, old-fashioned Christmas traditions, it'll be fun. But I forgot about the fact that so many of the things that we think about as classic Christmas traditions came from the Victorian era, which is the period after the Regency era, which is Jane Austen's time. A lot of that hadn't come about yet. So including the fact that, you know, one thing they were mentioning was, you know, would Jane Austen have had a Christmas tree? Maybe, but probably not, actually. Because Christmas trees weren't really, you know, in fashion in England until, you know, the 1840s. And that had to do with, you know, Queen Victoria, who was married to a German. And this was a German tradition. So generally, unless you had German family, it wasn't really likely that you had a Christmas tree. Some people did, but again, those people probably had German family. So there's a lot of really fun stuff in here. Food's done, y'all. Before I dish out the food, just to let you know, they're talking about some of the things, some of the days and some of the things that were celebrated. There was something called Stir It Up Sunday. On the 5th Sunday before Christmas, the family would gather to stir up Christmas puddings that needed to age before serving at Christmas dinner. It's a fun book. This is actually very interesting. I'm enjoying it very much. And it taught me how to make something new and interesting and kind of delicious. Kind of looks like that. I know we got some steam going on, so it's hard to see. It is very, like, I'm so glad I wore my apron. Man, I should wear an apron 24/7, I gotta be honest with you. Going on. Let's see. And the texture of the cucumbers is sort of like hot pickles. I mean, you know, it's similar kind of, let's see. It's genuinely lovely. This is, I would eat this. I would serve this. I think it would be so cool to have people over and be like, oh yeah, and we're having stewed cucumbers. And they'd be like, what? I'd be like, you will learn something now. The onion is very dominant. The cucumber does kind of fade into the background and it ends up being sort of support. I almost feel like you could sort of have the amount of onion in here. I mean, it's lovely with the onion. I think if you only had 3 onions, you'd still be fine. This is probably, now that I think of it, really full of sugar. We don't often think of onions as being high sugar vegetables, but they really are. What a weird thing to turn out to be delicious. But this is the thing. Look at this. We fucked around and we found out. And we found out that things that sound weird can be delicious. So thank you very much, Ashley, for that awesome book. I'm really glad that I got to try something from it. Thank you to all of you for hanging out and watching me try this. You know, if you are of a mind to try it out yourself, I say you should do that. This is, it's been a lot of fun. I'm glad I did this. Thank you very much for watching. Please remember to like and subscribe, share this, show it to people if you would like to do that. Please remember to come back every Thursday. I do have a new video every Thursday. Sometimes I have more than one video in a week, but I always at least have something on Thursday for you. And if you would like to send me a cookbook from my wish list or something else from my wish list, that's going to be in the description. And anything that I talked about, you know, like the website about the Pliny the Elder stewed cucumber recipe, that's going to be in the description as well. So take a look at that. Thank you so much for hanging out. I will see you next time. Try new things. Bye.
Hey, turn up the caramello and shizzle on the shizney. It's time for me to what? Let me introduce myself. I'm Gina Burrito. My pants are made of leather.